We are live.
As the clock strikes
Let's
7,
see if I can
the
share.
vibes alive. Inner circles here, where voices thrive. Turn on your screens, let the magic unfold. Listening and healing as stories are told. Come on, come on, this is your time. No topics too tough, just heed the calls. From mental health woes to justice we seek. Together we rise for the strong and the meek. A safe space for all, let's lift every voice. Inner Circle podcast where hearts unite. Sharing our truths, bringing hope to the light. Community strong, we're never alone. Together as one, we've created a home. With laughter and love, we break down the walls. No topics too tough, just heed the calls. From mental health woes to justice we seek. Together we rise for the strong and the meek. A safe space for all, let's lift every voice. So join.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Today is Tuesday, February 18th, and we have a very special guest who's going to be educating us again on the topic of, immigration, things like that. So that's something that's been hot off the press. And so we have taken the last few weeks to educate our community. So tonight's topic is empowering immigrants, understanding your rights in the face of change. And we have Representative Sandra Fest here today, who's going to be helping us, providing us some great information. There is an Inner Cycle podcast where we provide you some great information, provide information that is relevant, that is current, especially right now we are in times of change, and things like that. So we really appreciate Representative Sandra First coming on here tonight to educate our folks out there that have anxiety, is confused about what's going on, and things like that. So I'm your host, Abe Kamara, and we'll go around the room quick and introduce our panelists, and then from there we'll jump into things. Titus.
Good evening. I'm Titus, and I'm excited to be here tonight. Representative, we cannot thank you much. We cannot emphasize on how much we appreciate you, with all of the busy schedules. You set aside some time to just kick it with us tonight and educate the community. We appreciate you. And to everybody in the audience, feel free, chime in, give your input. Let's have a discussion and let's stay informed.
Mel.
Good evening, everybody. This is Melvin Zia. I'm excited about our topic tonight and our special guest, Sandra. Just talking about issues that are impacting us currently, and just having someone with expertise in such a topic is key. So, be involved. Let's discuss as it relates to what we are about to talk about tonight. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Sandra, for taking up your busy schedule to join us and just inform our community on such an important issue tonight.
Andrea.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Andrea here. Thank you all for listening and joining. Representative Feist, thank you so much for holding space today. I know there's a lot happening, and so it's always a pleasure when we can have representatives or government officials, rather, to come in and talk to our community and help build capacity. So we welcome you and thank you for being here.
Okay. Thank you so much to our dynamic panelists. Again, the topic tonight is empowering immigrants, understanding your rights in the face of change. And our guest is Representative Sandra Fest. Before we get into things, please follow us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook, and also follow us on Twitter, on LinkedIn. And you can download wherever you get your podcast, from Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Please follow Inner Circle Podcast. With that, Representative Fest, can you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all so much for inviting me here tonight. It's really an honor to be on your show. I'm a representative in the Minnesota House. I was first elected in 2020. So I am currently in my third term. My district is 39B, which is the southern part of New Brighton, most of Columbia Heights, and all of St. Anthony. So we have a very diverse district. We have a lot of new arrivals from Ecuador, as well as the largest Somali community outside of Minneapolis, or in Minnesota, outside of Minneapolis. I also am an immigration attorney. I first started working in the field of immigration law as a paralegal in 2001. And I eventually decided to go to law school after 9/11 because I saw the way that my clients were being treated by the government. And I knew that I needed to do more to advocate for them. I started out, I was down in New Orleans singing, and then I ended up in law school somehow. And I evacuated here from New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina 20 years ago this August. And finished up law school up here. And so I've been an attorney since 2007. So that's a little bit about me.
So, were you born and raised in Louisiana?
No, I'm actually from Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
But I wanted to be a Broadway star. And
Okay.
so I was going to go to New York, but then I realized I really suck at dancing. And so I decided to move to New Orleans just to sing. So I moved down there and I was singing in the French Quarter and being an artsy person, but also needed money. And that's how I ended up getting a job as an immigration paralegal. And that was kind of how I found my path.
Okay. And then real quick, where did you go to law school here in Minnesota? Where?
I graduated from William Mitchell College of
Okay.
Law, which is now Mitchell Hamlin.
Okay. That's a tough one. Well, the first question for you as an immigration lawyer, right? How will you describe like the current environment? I mean, how will you describe it as a representative? How will you describe what's going on right now?
Yeah, well, things are very bad. Obviously, it's interesting. I think a lot of people thought things were a bit better over the last 4 years under President Biden, but honestly, things have not been good for a very long time. And so we were seeing, really extreme delays, really absurd denials, just a lot of people caught in limbo, a lot of people not able to enter the country who were claiming asylum under our laws in a legal way. So I honestly, things were really shocking the first time that Trump was elected. The way that he attacked the immigration bureaucracies, the way that he implemented just really cruel, inhumane, really short-sighted policies was shocking the first time around. But things really never recovered. And so, it's been really awful. And I can't overstate that, but also it hasn't felt as shocking. Like we were kind of heading into the new administration expecting a lot of what we've seen.
Okay. Titus, question for Representative Fest. You're on mute, Titus.
Oh, sorry about that. Yes, absolutely. So, Representative Fez, thank you again. What would you I know you kind of described the environment and how everything is feeling for especially for the immigrant community. What would you say to immigrants at this time as it relates to their rights, especially first encounter with ICE agents? What are some ABCs that immigrants need to know during this time?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it is really important for immigrant communities to know that there are leaders here in Minnesota at the state, at the local levels, at public health clinics, at our schools who see them and support them and want to be there for them. So I encourage people who are afraid, who have questions, who have concerns, about sending their kids to school or about requesting assistance for, food or housing, that they reach out to people in public office to request information and assistance. So I just want people to know that they're not alone and that, the Trump administration won by a tiny sliver and they lost here in Minnesota. And so, here in Minnesota, there are a lot of people, a majority of people who really want to make sure that immigrants are seen and are supported. In terms of just really practical advice, one of the things that I wanted to mention is that one of the policies that the Trump administration has implemented is an expansion of something called expedited removal. And basically, what that means is that people who have been here for less than 2 years may have way less rights under our legal systems to have due process, to see an immigration judge. And so, for anybody who is a relatively new arrival that has been here for 2 years, they should keep with them proof of that. And that doesn't need to be, personal documents with sensitive information. It can be immigration documents. It can be just, utility bills, bank statements, just, proof that they have been physically present in the United States for at least 2 years. So
Okay.
that's something that I think is really important for people to know. And then, we can talk as well about kind of what to do if you run into ICE or if ICE comes to
Yeah.
you as well.
Okay. Yeah.
So
We could talk.
just to confirm with you on what you just said. So for the folks who have been here under 2 years, they do not have the rights to due process
Not necessarily.
according to the
So
expedited process.
So expedited removal does not apply to all immigrants. It generally is going to apply to people who did not enter the United States lawfully, or maybe they were apprehended at the border. So I'm speaking in really broad terms because better assume it applies to you than not. But it is a little bit nuanced in terms of who it is going to apply to. But we know that they are going to be very overbroad and very hasty and very reckless in terms of who they just assume it applies to. And so we have very deep concerns that people who are lawfully here, people who are green card holders or US citizens, are going to get swept up in this expansion of expedited removal.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah, but I don't want to say like 100%. If you've been here for
Okay.
less than 2 years, that you're
Okay.
subject to expedited removal. It's a bit narrower than that.
Okay. Andrew, a question for Representative First.
Yeah, so once again, thank you so much for being here. Just to kind of expound on the last question, as it relates to legal protections and resources, how can immigrant families protect themselves legally, especially in the cases where parents and their children have different immigration statuses?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, there are a lot of things that you can do working with an attorney in terms of just setting up a plan of action for, like, if a family is separated, who will have custody and supervision over children who might be left behind. I have a document that I've been passing around that I'm happy to share with your listeners, your viewers, that is just attorneys who provide kind of those adjacent services, who can make sure that people are thinking proactively about what do they do to make sure that their finances are taken care of, that their ownership of their property. One of the things that people have asked me is, will their property be taken by the government? And the answer, to my knowledge, is no. The government should not be able to just like take people's property, take their homes just because they have been deported. But it is good to talk to attorneys who specialize in just helping with those legal instruments so that you are prepared for that possibility.
Okay. And yeah, do you have a follow-up question or anything else? Or?
Thank you for that. That was really helpful. I will just say, I know that like right now is a very sensitive time, and in the communities, a lot of folks are not comfortable with like going out even in public and going into like spaces like churches or protected spaces, right? Can you talk a little bit more about I forgot what the actual law was, but I believe there were some protections that were taken away as it relates to like schools and like churches, and I forgot what else kind of fell under that. But like, can you talk a little bit more about like what, if any, protections are under those sacred spaces, and how can folks that want to go to church or want to go to school or send their folks or kids to school like feel confident and feel safe in these spaces?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there has been a memo for a long time by ICE that was called their Sensitive Locations Memo. And during the first Trump administration, they didn't rescind that memo, but they officially said they weren't following it. So the fact that they've officially rescinded it isn't actually different than the first time around. What that memo said is that ICE would generally not be arresting people or engaging in enforcement activities in sensitive locations such as our courts, our schools, health clinics, hospitals. and religious institutions. And so the new policy is just that they'll use their judgment. I have heard some reports that there have been some incidents at schools. Honestly, like none of those reports, like, do I feel like really confident that that definitely happened at that place at that time to that person. Like, I don't feel like I have personally verified. They're right after Trump was inaugurated, or right after the inauguration, there was a report of ICE showing up at an elementary school in Chicago, and it turned out that was not ICE. And so I do think we have to be really careful about the information we share. I know I've heard from reliable sources that there are more immigrants in detention in Minnesota right now than there have been in a while. So like there definitely is an uptick in immigration enforcement, but to date, I haven't heard extensive anecdotes of ICE showing up at schools. I have heard a little bit of reports around ICE showing up in courts, and that's something that I'm looking into, and in conversations with colleagues and with county attorneys and the judicial branch about that. I think we can expect that there will probably be some high profile incidents, maybe not in Minnesota, but they will probably do something awful to make a point and to make people feel afraid. But I don't actually expect that they will engage in widespread enforcement in schools in particular. I'm just going to read, there's a comment I heard in Texas.
No,
There
no,
was a school girl.
we will do that. We'll
You'll
do
do
that.
the comment? Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Sorry,
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
do
yeah.
the comments.
Yeah. So just go ahead and educate. Definitely, yeah. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Well,
Yeah.
the other thing I was going to mention is that Attorney General Keith Ellison issued some guidance in collaboration with the Department of Education, and they just released that. And it's a Word document. I wanted to post it on my official Facebook page, but I couldn't. It's just a document. But if you're interested in that, it's just
Yes.
guidance to schools,
Definitely.
talking about how they can be really systematic in protecting their school, protecting their student body, from that intrusion and also just from that trauma. But I don't want to, I don't want to imply that, if we just all stand up, that it's going to be fine. Like ICE does have a right to go into public spaces. And if they do have a judicial warrant signed by a judge for a specific location, then they may have a legal right. What we have seen a lot of times is that ICE is, they don't always bother to get the warrant. Like they like to cut corners and collect data and go to places without necessarily having done all of the paperwork. And so we are working really hard, like both at state government level and with each individual school district, to make sure that they know when they can say no if ICE is trying to come in.
Okay. Mel, question for Representative Fest.
Yes, Representative Fest, thank you for, just taking upon your busy schedule and coming here tonight to educate us. My first question to you would be, what are legal resources that are available to help immigrants understand their rights? And if so, could you just please, are there specific organizations or resources you can recommend for ongoing education about immigration rights, basically as it relates to what we're talking about tonight?
Yeah, so there are a lot of really excellent resources out there. I have links that I can give to you afterwards that you can share. The Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota has a consolidated page with a bunch of Know Your Rights documents in multiple languages. They also have really great videos. The ACLU of Minnesota, as well as the National ACLU, also have excellent Know Your Rights materials and videos. I have a document with just kind of all the best ones that I've seen that I can share with you. But the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota and the ACLU, both national and Minnesota, are great places to look. There's also a really wonderful organization that's just about helping communities create welcoming environments that are supportive of immigrants. And they have some really excellent materials for just local leaders and local communities. And I can share those with you as well. So those are just, advice on how we can make safe spaces.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Tonight, folks, we are discussing empowering immigrants, understanding your rights in the face of change. And we have Representative Sandra Fess here with us tonight. So you can contribute, you can put a chat in a comment, and she will answer your question, your concerns. And you can also call our number 817-600-1525 to contribute to a very, very important discussion as she educates us and provide us some great resources. Regarding what Belita is saying here, right? Is this whole issue about fear, right? It's like it's a lot of stuff. I mean, she's mentioning, I don't know whether it is true or not, but a little girl took her life, right? Is that because she fear of maybe her parents being deported? It's like there's so much fear in the immigrant community right now. What can a community do, right? To kind of maybe it's like what can we do in this? I mean, in these heightened times right now, what can the immigrant community do?
Well, I would really encourage everyone to reach out to their state senator, their state representative, and their federal, so Minnesota has 2 senators, and each of you have a US congressperson. And it is really important to share that fear and share those stories with them. Having been working in the field of immigration law my entire adult life, like since 2001, and seeing immigration through many eras, like many political eras, I've always been extremely frustrated by how little politicians seem to care and how little political capital and energy they put into advocating for immigration reform and immigrant communities. And if they hear from you, they're much more likely to feel passionate about this issue, and also to know that there are residents in their districts, in their communities, constituents of theirs, many of whom can vote or have family members who can vote, for whom this is a really important issue and they need to hear it. And so I would, it's not, it's a way to feel empowered, and just know that even if you are not a citizen, like you are a resident of this state and of your community, you are a constituent. And I really encourage you to share your stories. And I can share a link with you. It's a really easy way to find all of your elected officials.
Okay. You've been immigration arena for so long, you say, like out of your adult life. Why is it so much negative narrative against immigrants and immigration right now, right? It's like, why is what has changed? I mean, why is there so much negativity, right? You hear immigrants are committing crimes, immigrants are doing this. Why? Why is that?
I think there is something really dark about human nature. Like, honestly, like I think a lot about just the way that like leaders, like bad leaders, can prey upon fear and the unknown and discomfort. And I honestly think that our leaders are preying upon people's fear, and like appealing to their worst instincts. And you see that in countries throughout the world, you see that throughout history. And I think there's just something about human nature that this just seems to happen like cyclically. But I really believe, like, I mean, like there are both emotional and like human rights, and also just like logical, like not that it's not logical, but like just like objective, like workforce data. Like I was emailing today with our state demographer, because I was asking her for all this data on immigrants and our workforce broken down by sector. And so like there's every reason to support immigrants. We all need to just, like, leaders need to speak up, honestly. Like I will just say, like, I've been incredibly frustrated. One of the reasons I ran for office is I felt like even, elected leaders who said they were pro-immigrant and supported immigration really didn't talk about it and didn't really like speak up, and weren't forceful and persuasive. And I just felt really, after 4 years of being an immigration attorney under Trump, I was just really sick of asking people to say the right thing and do the right thing and prioritize, supporting immigrants. And so that's why I ran for office. But I feel like we need more people for whom this is an animating issue that matters most to them.
Okay.
And that requires people to share their stories and let them know they vote on this issue.
Okay. Titus, question for Representative Fest.
Have you had any reports or stories, any kind of communication from any immigrant during these times? Have you received anything?
From immigrants?
Any
Yeah, I
calls
mean
to
from
your
your
office
constituents. Yeah, from your
about
constituents.
this situation?
Have I, like, from my constituents as a
Yeah,
representative?
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
like, yeah, as an immigration attorney, like every day, all day. Um, you know, not a lot from my own constituents on this issue. Um, when you're a representative, the angry people email you a lot more than the people who know that, like, you're with them. And so I get a lot of angry emails from people who don't agree with me, even though my district is like 71% voted for me. But I do work very closely with immigrant advocates. Last term, I introduced the North Star Act, which, if we had passed it, would have addressed a lot of the concerns we have about ICE trying to force our state and local government entities to collaborate with them, to share data with them. And that was just like a huge group of immigrant advocates that I worked with very closely. And so yeah, I mean, as far as my own constituents, my district is, this definitely is an issue that matters to them, and they're on the same page as me. I would say most of my emails are angry ones, and then also people who are very passionate about environmental issues,
Okay.
and also just like supportive of like equality and equity. So it's a good
Okay.
district.
Okay. Just real quick, can you like briefly describe what that ad was? Let's say if it was going
Yeah.
to pass, you know what it is?
Yeah. So the North Star Act was a bill that I chief authored in the House. In the Senate, it was Senator Omar Fateh. And we worked very closely together last term, actually the whole term, to introduce the North Star Act. And that basically, it prohibited data sharing and collaboration between state and local government entities and ICE when it was for the sole purpose of immigration enforcement. It also created restrictions on the gathering of information that was sensitive and could, if collected by ICE, they would be able to identify who were immigrants. So for example, we didn't want schools or courts or health clinics to collect immigration status data. So that's what it was. It was a great bill. It was modeled after bills passed in Washington State, Illinois, California. But unfortunately, there was not the political will, even though we had a DFL trifecta, and I really regret that.
Okay.
I mean, we tried.
Okay, another question here again for Brother. With all these issues we have at state, what if a person with a DUI or a warrant got pulled over by a car? What is the chance, even if they're a green card holder, would they be considered for deportation?
So generally speaking, a DWI is not a ground of removability. If somebody has multiple convictions and it's like they're aggravating factors relating to that DWI, then theoretically it could be, but generally speaking, driving under the influence is not something that will get you deported, especially if you are a green card holder. It's much harder to remove somebody than it is to deny them a green card or deny them entry into the United States. But even those people, generally speaking, that's not something that would get in the way of their long-term immigration process.
Okay. Andrea, question from you.
Yeah, as it relates to community engagement, I know you talked about ways that we could reach out, to our leaders and representatives and senators. What role can local communities play in advocating for immigrant rights and creating safer spaces outside of like the storytelling and reaching out to our leaders?
Yeah. Well, I mean, holding people accountable for the votes they take, I think is important. Sorry, this is like related. For example, Angie Craig voted for the Lake and Riley Act. The Lake and Riley Act is a really bad new law that was signed into law. It makes it so that somebody who has been arrested, so not charged, not convicted, but arrested of a theft offense, including shoplifting, subject to mandatory detention and possible removal. It also creates a mechanism where really ideological anti-immigrant attorneys general in other states like Texas can file lawsuits that can impact immigration for the whole country. So this was a really bad bill. It's going to result in racial profiling leading to deportations, and Angie Craig voted for it. And I think when you hear that people vote for these types of bills, even when they don't pass, although this one did, I think that we need to hold people accountable and remind them that we're watching. In terms of creating safe spaces, I mean, like building networks. One of the things that I'm doing is we're building communication lines between we're calling it like the whole of government. So the Senate, the House, the governor's office, the AG, like the whole state government apparatus, and we're creating mechanisms where we're sharing information, having regular meetings, making sure that we're able to be proactive and not just reactive. And so I think building those networks now, sharing information with one another, building those trusted relationships, I think will be really important. We don't know what is coming next. And I think if we have built really strong networks of communication and those relationships, then I think we will be prepared if things get darker to protect one another.
Yeah, just a follow-up quick question to that. With the Lincoln Rally ad that you just mentioned, would that create more opportunity for ICE or for the government, like, I mean, for deportation? Because as you said, right, if you are convicted or you are caught shoplifting, right, you can be detained and possibly removed, right? And those are sometimes, I won't say a petty crime, but I mean, if you as an immigrant, if you are caught in committing some sort of a crime, I mean, you are at risk, especially if you are a green card holder or something. I mean, do you think it's going to create more risks for immigrants?
Yes, I think it's a really bad law. We don't quite know kind of how it's going to be implemented because ICE doesn't have the capacity to go after everyone who is removable. Like they just don't. So we don't really know yet how it will look on the ground. Like it was literally just passed. But the thing that I worry about, I work a lot in the juvenile justice policy space, and kids are dumb, and sometimes they shoplift, or sometimes they're just like a kid, a kid of color who's at a store and being profiled. And if you are arrested for shoplifting now, there are no carve outs for kids. They will detain you, or they at least have the right to detain you.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a really bad bill that they passed very quickly. 43 Democrats, I believe, voted for it in the House, and 7 Democrats voted for it in the Senate. And we need to make Democrats understand that that's not okay. Like it's not okay to vote for extremist, anti-immigrant policies just because they think that like somehow that's splitting the issue down the middle somehow.
Okay. Mel, question for Representative first.
Yeah, as it relates to policy changes, my question is kind of in relation to that. How do recent changes in immigration policies affect immigrant rights? And can you just little explain recent changes in law that may impact immigrants' situation, and what should they be aware of as it relates to the policy changes that relates to immigration law?
So we've talked about expedited removal, which is expanding that rule that makes it easier to deny due process for people who have been here for less than 2 years. I'm sure you heard about the Birthright Citizenship Executive Order, which pretends that the 14th Amendment doesn't exist and that 100 years of case law doesn't exist. That is currently held up by the federal courts, and we do expect that to be found unconstitutional. So in the interest of just everyone focusing on the things that would most likely impact them that they have any control over, I would say don't worry about the Birthright Citizenship Executive Order at this point. And so I'm trying to think of the other things that, like, they did a whole bunch of things just to make it much harder for people who want to claim asylum at the port of entry to do so. It was already not easy. There was this really bad app that didn't work very well. The app doesn't exist anymore, so people can't even do that. So it's much harder for people to just go through the legal process of claiming
Mhm.
asylum. And when they do, they've created new shifts in terms of what is the burden of proof and who has that burden in terms of making those preliminary claims of asylum around like credible fear of persecution if they go back to their home country. So they've done a lot of things that are impacting humanitarian immigration. Another thing that they're doing is getting rid of a lot of the temporary protections that we created for the Ukrainian community. The Afghans who were not able to come at this point most likely will not be able to come,
Mm.
even though they supported us in our war in Afghanistan. 60,000 approximately Afghan refugees are here in Minnesota, and we probably won't have any more.
Okay.
I shouldn't say like no more, but like they've basically cut off refugee admissions. They've also ended abruptly programs that were created to create a more orderly way for people from countries where a lot of people were trying to come to the border. So
Mhm.
Venezuela, Nicaragua, they're cutting. I don't think they've cut off Nicaragua, but Venezuela, they like abruptly terminated the extension of Venezuelan temporary
Mhm.
protective status.
Mhm.
So we know that they are very opposed to humanitarian parole, temporary protective statuses, ways that we can help immigrants come here based on humanitarian
Mhm.
reasons. And so they're slowly cutting off those types of programs.
Mhm. Yeah, folks,
Uh,
tonight, just real quick, Tyler. Tonight we are discussing empowering immigrants, understanding your rights in the face of change, and Representative Chandra First is providing us great education, great information that is very, very helpful to the immigrant community. Tyler, go ahead.
Great information tonight. Again, we'll continue to appreciate you through the show. I'm interested in when you talked about the birthright citizenship and that folks should not worry about it now since, there's a law there that protects that right. But what about the parents who might not be, legally or documented immigrants here who have their kids who were born here? Are there any policies to protect any type of separation from their children who were born here?
No, the Trump administration does not care about the fact that they might separate families. Parents of US citizen children should talk with attorneys and see what options might be available to them. When you have US citizen or permanent resident relatives, in certain circumstances, that might entitle you to relief from removal. So the fact that they do have US citizen children, it might become part of their immigration case. But until a child is 21, they can't sponsor a parent for a green card. So if you're undocumented and you have an adult child who's a US citizen, that's very different than someone who just had a baby. That won't likely impact their situation, unfortunately.
What
Okay.
becomes of those children who are separated from their parents? I mean, what is the
Yeah,
further process down the line? What
yeah.
happens to those children?
It's something that the schools have been trying to grapple with to figure out what to do to support those kids if parents are picked up while they're at school. Um, it's it's awful. I don't
Okay.
I don't have words.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, just the other
Yeah.
thing though, right? For immigrants right now that I maybe caught up in this whole thing, right? Maybe they are illegal, but they're afraid to seek legal help. What advice do you have for them as an immigration attorney, right? Folks out there who are afraid because there's so much fear out there. There's so much information. It's like an information overload, right? You don't know what is true, what's not true. And
I
so some
know.
folks that their stories have some folks are just staying indoors. They are not
Mhm,
getting out. Like what advice do you have for
mhm.
folks who want to seek legal help, but they are so afraid as an immigration
Yeah.
attorney?
Yeah. Well, so immigration attorneys are here to help you. The information you share with them is confidential. And so I really, really strongly advise people who need legal advice to feel comfortable reaching out to immigration experts.
Mhm.
One of the things I wanted to share with you is that the Attorney General,
Mhm.
Keith Ellison, has some really great resources on his website about how immigrants can avoid scams. And
Yeah.
so, one of the things that he talks about is if an attorney reaches out to you, that is unethical and that is super sketchy.
Okay.
So, probably a red flag.
Mhm.
If an attorney is trying to rush you into pay them or
Mhm.
telling you to pay them with a gift card, that is a red flag. If you hear some really terrible stories about people who threaten their clients with deportation if they don't pay them.
Oh.
Attorney General Ellison just finished up a lawsuit against this incredibly sketchy, abusive guy who was working with a lot of people on their immigration, and he was really um, threatening to them, and then also did not do their cases.
Mhm.
So, those are red flags. I think the other thing that is really important, I can't tell you how many times I've had people come to me where somebody in their community, somebody that was like a friend of a friend, like was trying to
Mhm.
help them out and really did a bad job
Mm.
because they didn't understand immigration law.
Okay.
And the immigration laws are really unforgiving. So if you
Mm.
make an honest mistake, like the immigration laws very rarely will be forgiving. If you put something on a document that's not true, because like somebody said, oh no, that's fine, you can just say that, it won't be a problem. The immigration laws still consider that fraud and
Mm.
misrepresentation.
Okay.
So I really do recommend going to an attorney or a free legal clinic. There are places you can go for free. For a long time I volunteered at a clinic and it's still there. It's at the Park Methodist Church in Minneapolis. And
Mhm.
off the top of my head, I think it's still every Thursday from 3 to 5.
Okay.
Basically, people would just go in, they'd line up in the hallway, and then we would just see as many people as we could.
Mhm.
And a lot of times, those people had no options, but sometimes talking with somebody and having them look at your documents and talk everything through with you
Mhm.
and give you that advice is also just for your peace of mind can be really beneficial. So there are, free options. There are private attorneys. Because our immigration laws are so unjust and so unforgiving, you really should work with like a qualified immigration professional.
Okay. Okay. I mean, thank you for sharing that. Andrew, a question from you.
So I have two questions. Abe, thanks for asking that question because that was like one of them. Um, I'm just speaking in terms of just our community, African immigrant community. Build trust is huge, right? And I know you talked about seeking a qualified attorney. Sometimes that's just not enough, right? Like we know attorneys are there to do the job, but like, do you have any other pointers or ways that our community could really feel confident and comfortable that they're actually like seeking the right individual or attorney? And like you said, there's a lot of fraudsters out there, but there's a lot of people that need help and they want to go and ask, but they just are like, I don't know. Like, are there any outside of like what you've mentioned so far, are there any like kind of pointers or ways that we know for sure, like, okay, this person's legit, I can confidently go in and discuss my status and like feel confident that like, hey, they're not pushing a button behind wherever they're at and calling,
Mhm.
ICE or whoever.
Yeah, I mean, I have never heard of that happening, that, like, somebody was, like, a
It could
secret,
have happened out
like,
there.
collaborator with ICE. The big issue is just that they might suck and do a bad job, and that's not what you want,
Right.
or take your money and do nothing. The American Immigration Lawyers Association has a directory. I can't say that every single AILA member is the best attorney I've ever met, but, like, generally speaking, if they are a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, that means that they are a serious immigration attorney who specializes in immigration. Sometimes people just have it maybe somebody like they're from an immigrant community and they mostly do like trust and estates or something and they just put on immigration because they're like, well, that comes up a lot. but they're not actually focused on immigration law. Generally speaking, if they have on their website that they're a member of ALA, then you can know that they're a serious attorney. I also just think like referrals are really important. That like if somebody tells you they worked with somebody and that they answered their calls, that they got the green card or citizenship, like I think those personal referrals are a good way to find an attorney.
Okay.
Yeah, and just trust your gut. Like if somebody, like if you call somebody and they don't call you back fast, or like they take your money and then they just ignore you, you know, you have rights, and Attorney General Ellison is ready to help you assert those rights. Like if like he's really focused
Hmm.
on the issue of you know,
Sure.
people scamming immigrant communities.
Okay. What's the second question, Andrea?
Sure. So, as it relates to legal protections, what legal protections exist for immigrants facing workplace discrimination or unfair treatment? I know there's a lot of things happening with that. Can you speak more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like the theoretical rights under the law, and then some practical issues with how the Trump administration is gutting labor protections, like the NLRB, and you know the different federal laws that are there to protect immigrants and protect people from discrimination are obviously under attack by the Trump administration. But in theory, under state and federal law, for sure under state law, actually, just like let's just let's leave it at state law. Excuse me. I don't know what's going to happen in the federal government, but here in Minnesota, we have the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, and they are incredible. I'm so sorry. I'm going to like drink my tea because I'm going to cough.
No, no, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
So one sec.
Go ahead.
So yeah, so the Minnesota Department of Human Rights is there to make sure that people are not discriminated against in a lot of contexts, but definitely in employment. Rebecca Lucero is the commissioner, and she is just awesome. So we do have a really robust framework here in Minnesota to protect immigrants from discrimination in housing and employment. And so if people feel like they are being discriminated against, they definitely have rights, and you can go to that department. Other things that we've been doing at the state level, like one of the bills that I worked on that passed was to protect from wage theft in the construction industry. So in the construction industry, a lot of people who are undocumented work for subcontractors. They don't necessarily speak English. They're often even provided housing by the person who employs them, so they're very vulnerable. And so what we find is that it's just this scenario that really is rife with employers just not paying them, or not
Okay.
paying them what they said they would. And so we passed a law that said that there's liability up to the top if wage theft occurs. So we're trying every year to put more protections in. We also created more protections against labor trafficking.
Mhm.
And that was another bill that I worked on that was specifically kind of focused on supporting immigrants from being exploited. So there
Mhm.
is a really, like, no matter what happens in the federal level, like there is a lot of state law protections from discrimination. And so I encourage people, like the Department of Human Rights, like just place an inquiry. Also, the Attorney General has a consumer complaint line. My husband worked for the AG's office for 4 years, and their consumer people are the best people. Like they know more than the lawyers, and they're
Okay.
there for you.
Okay. Well, folks, tonight we are discussing empowering immigrants, understanding your rights in the face of change. You know, we have Representative First in the house tonight, ready, providing us some great information. So you can call our number 817-600-1525, or you can put a comment or question in the chat, and she will definitely address that. Titus, anything from you?
So as these times continue, right? Immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants, are obviously very afraid of everything that's going on. And we were made aware also that ICE has the right to conduct search and seizures. But then I also came across um, an article that talked about even illegal immigrants have rights that are protected against that. Is this something you can confirm? Can you expand on this?
Yeah. So if ICE comes to your door, they have to have a warrant signed by a judge with your name and address on it, or a resident of the home and their address in order to be let in. So, for example, I showed up at a constituent of mine's house and they had a warrant with somebody else's name on it, and they said, "You can't come in." And so ICE went away, and then I went over to make sure they were okay. But yeah, so ICE is not allowed to come into a space if they don't have the proper warrant. And a lot of times they don't. A lot of times it might not be signed. And so some of those videos that I mentioned that I'll send you links to have really good sort of just role playing to show kind of what that might look like. Sometimes the ICE might lie to you, and they might say they're there about something else. They might not be dressed like law enforcement, but absolutely everyone has a Fourth Amendment right to not have a search of their home if there isn't a warrant and if they don't consent.
Okay.
How about when you're operating a motor vehicle, when you're driving?
So you do not have to give law enforcement information about your immigration status. You can say you want to talk with an attorney. You have the right to remain silent.
In that case, though, if they arrest you, right, if they pull you over or maybe arrest you and say you want to talk to your attorney, what happens? Do they wait for your attorney, or they go? I mean, what happens then?
So they would still like process the arrest, but you do not have to answer questions.
Okay. So you as an attorney, then we arrive there. What do you do for that person? I mean, do you bail them out, or I mean, what happened next?
Well, so I don't handle those types of cases too often. But you know, it very much depends on the circumstances. Like, what have you been arrested for? Are you undocumented? So I don't know that I'm the best immigration attorney to tell you exactly what that might look like. But absolutely, like, an attorney can tell you, for example, like when I would go, you just do like what's called the detained master calendar. So people have been picked up and they're in immigration proceedings. So you just talk with them and you figure out, like, do they have US citizen relatives, permanent resident relatives who might impact them? Are they afraid of going back to their home country? You know, there's something called the Convention Against Torture, which even if you're not eligible for asylum, if you're eligible for this other relief from removal, they can't deport you. And so there are ways that, like, not being deported leads to a green card and then citizenship, and then you're done. There are other ways where you can stay here and you can be out of custody, but you don't ever get a green card. You can't ever sponsor relatives. So the attorney's job is to just kind of screen for what options might there be.
Okay. So again, like another one, those like, what should an immigrant do if they receive a letter from immigration authorities or from ICE, or if ICE contact them? What should someone do?
Yeah, get in touch with an attorney. If you can't afford an attorney, there are like really good free legal services. The Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, the Legal Aid also provides immigration assistance. There are those free clinics I mentioned. The other thing you can do is the law schools have immigration clinics, and they're always looking for people to help so that their students can learn. And so that's another way to get free legal services. So there are plenty of people out there, whether you are able to hire a private attorney to advise or find one of these free services, have an expert look at that letter. Don't ignore it. You know, there's something called being ordered removed in absentia, which is that the judge signs the order of removal and you just didn't show up and didn't leave the country. And that is just super problematic forever. Like, I was just talking with somebody where we like it happened a million years ago when she was a child, and we're like, oh my gosh, like, how do we like undo that before we can even move forward with what comes next? And so don't ignore it. Talk to an expert.
Okay. Mel, question from you. You're on mute, sir.
Thank you. So, you know I asked a question earlier that relates to the policy changes, and you mentioned something about the current administration kind of putting step to certain laws that were put in place to allow people to come in to America, which is a pathway. and now the country is trying to stop, or government trying to stop the illegal immigrant. Now, my question to you, Sandra, with the pathway created to allow people that are in war-torn countries, like people that are experiencing war, that want to seek refuge in America, and that being prevented, and you also kind of going after illegal immigrant. What do you think is driving that confusion with, trying to, get rid of illegal immigrant, and also stopping the pathway that allows immigrants to come to America, because America is a big enough hope for a lot of people outside of America and look forward to this country. And putting stop to that, it seems like it's little kind of questionable, and we're trying to understand that. What do you think is driving that? If you can speak to that directly.
Yeah, I mean, it is not logical. They said that they were just, wanting to get on top of illegal immigration, but like you said, they are stopping legal immigration pathways like refugee resettlement, like asylum, and also like employment-based, just people coming on work visas, getting green cards based on their work. It's all been much harder since the first Trump administration. And honestly, it's just, I think it's obviously a lot of racism and xenophobia, but I think it's also a lot of political opportunism, that, Trump and the people who align with him see this as a really good political strategy. I see it in the Minnesota House. We get to know our colleagues across the aisle and have real conversations with them. And generally, everyone's a human being. And so it's especially frustrating for me when I see people who I've had conversations about, legal immigration, immigrants, and how important they are to our workforce. And then they still introduce bills that are, hateful and exclusionary. And, they use this Trump-like rhetoric, talking about how immigrants are, taking jobs and, using our resources. And they know better. I quote the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce at them on the House floor, and I know they know better. So I think it's just the worst type of political opportunism. And it's really unfortunate. And I just like, my hope is that those of us who care deeply about this issue can show, other politicians who might not be as brave, or as passionate about this, that this like being pro-immigrant is also a great political strategy, to inspire people and motivate them. And like, also, it's really good for our tax base, for our economy, for our workforce, in the healthcare sector in particular. So, there's every reason to like push back against that, that leaders should be pushing back really vocally.
Okay. I know you have talked a lot about, Minnesota, some of the good work the legislature, Keith Ellison and other folks are doing. But what about, immigrating in other states, right? Our platform reach, folks all over the United States, folks in
Mhm.
Texas, maybe folks in Georgia, folks in Arizona, right? In other
Mhm.
communities that might not be so generous as Minnesota. What can they
Mhm.
do in these moments?
Mhm. Yeah, well, I'd like to say just come to Minnesota, but I'm sure they're
That's a
very
good one.
happy in their respective communities.
Yeah.
I know I'm a broken record here, but like really speaking up, reaching out to lawmakers, sharing stories. I really love it when the newspapers tell really specific stories of, immigrants in different type of work, like workforce sectors, like the Minnesota Public Radio, and then most recently the Minnesota Star Tribune, both had really excellent articles about all of these refugees who've come to Minnesota and who are caring for seniors, caring for people with disabilities. And so I think, we need to tell those stories, to get like just like I feel like for too long there's been this vacuum where Republicans had their narrative of fear and bigotry, and Democrats were just quiet. And so, we need to give Democrats across the country the fuel to like tell those stories of immigrant contributions to their state, to their communities. I thought it was really beautiful in was it Springfield, Ohio, the place
Mhm.
that was kind of featured in the presidential debates. The I feel so bad. Governor Mike DeWine, that's his name.
Mhm.
He wrote a really great article for the New York Times talking about the contributions of Haitian immigrants in
Mhm.
Ohio, in particular, in that community, and it was really powerful.
Okay.
And so I think, even in places like Ohio and Texas, there are people willing to listen and people who understand the contributions of immigrants. So speak up
Okay.
or come to
Okay.
Minnesota.
Definitely. That's a good one. That's a good one.
It's too
I
cold
support
here.
you that one. Come to Minnesota. Minnesota is the nicest state in the union. So come to
It's too
Minnesota.
cold.
Yeah, yeah. Go
It
ahead.
is,
Go ahead.
it
Go
is
ahead,
too
Tyler.
cold. Good
Yeah.
point.
Tyler's question from you.
Oh yeah, my mind kind of went to why some of these things happen. So there are folks who come here on temporary status, right? They're trying to get a pathway to permanent resident or whatever other status that will keep him here in the states. Um, but the process is something that needs to really be looked at. It takes sometimes forever for folks to really get any type of redress or speed up their application processes with immigration. You, as a legislator, um, are there any plans? Have you kind of stumbled over this before, where you're pushing or supporting any type of plan to address, this hall of process with immigration that even leave some folks um, undocumented and have to face deportation?
Well, I have lots of ideas for what we can do at the federal level to make the process more fair and fast. 1965, we set annual limits per country per green card category. And in 1990, we updated them and we haven't since. And so,
Mm,
updating those numbers to reflect the modern realities of how many immigrants are coming to the United States in the categories that we want them to would be a really good first step. We could extend a law called 245I, which expired in April of 2001. If we just changed the 2001 to be like 2027, 11 million immigrants could probably just like get their green cards and pay like a hefty fine, as long as they were otherwise eligible. So no criminal grounds of inadmissibility and they had like a job or a relative. So just extending to 45I would be a really elegant way to address the undocumented population. And like you said, like some people may not be eligible if you have serious crimes, if you don't have a qualifying US citizen or permanent resident relative, you don't have a job, like not everyone might get a green card, but that would go a long way.
mm,
And then there are so many bureaucratic things that we do that make the process long and stupid, that we could rectify in really elegant ways. Like, for example, like you get a work card and it looks like a driver's license with a photo. But in some contexts, you get a receipt notice, and the receipt notice is just valid for proof of work. And if we did that, then they wouldn't have to spend all their time and bureaucratic dollars like creating the cards. So there are like just procedural things the agencies could do, that would make them function more efficiently. So, like the Biden administration created a rule saying that if you timely filed your extension of your work card, that for 540 days it would remain valid. Like they did not think that within about 2 years they could issue you a stupid card that they used to be able to issue within 60 to 90 days until Obama got rid of that rule. And so, like, nothing should pen for 2 years. That's absurd, especially not like a work card that's so, like, these are really clear grounds of eligibility. So there's just a ton of things that the agencies could do to just function more efficiently and more creatively. I once had a dream, maybe I'll still be one day, director of the US Citizenship and Immigration Service,
mm.
because I feel like an immigration lawyer should be in charge of that agency because we understand all the what do receipt notices do, what do work cards do, and we can think in real practical terms about how to just function better. So I think it's a combination of like what I call atrophied immigration laws that have not been updated meaningfully since 1990, and
Mm.
also just bureaucracies that are run by unimaginative people who aren't willing to be creative.
Okay.
Mhm.
Just to expand on, I think you addressed a situation here earlier where in like, regarding someone in this country, right? Can you expand on that a little bit regarding like Belita question? And she says like, and if you need to show proof that you are not allowed back to your home country to be qualified for any status in the US, and do you need to show proof?
I don't know if I understand this question.
So I think it was
Um,
relating to like if you get pulled over by immigration and they take you. I think something like you talked about earlier, I think was leading to like if you are in custody and you need to show proof that you have been here two
Mhm.
years or something. Maybe I think
Mhm, mhm.
that's what she's alluding to or something.
Oh, yeah. Well, so I mean, in terms of like say that you are put into the immigration proceedings process normally, so you'll go
Yeah,
through the immigration judge.
yeah.
You know, there are many different pathways that your case might take. So you
Hmm.
might have been here for a while and have relatives and be eligible for something called cancellation of removal. You might be eligible for asylum. So, or like I said, Convention Against Torture. There's also something called withholding of removal. Like there are all these different things that could
Yeah.
happen from there. And
Mhm.
some of them relate to not being able to go back to your home country, not all of them.
Okay. Well, folks, we can't keep Representative Sandra Fessy all night. She's been providing us some good information. And there's a 1 hour show. So we'll give our panelists one last question and then we'll try to wrap this thing up. But it's been a great conversation, Representative Sandra Fessy. We really appreciate you coming on here, providing some great information and great education. Tados, I will start with you with the last question for the representative.
Well, we just really again want to thank you for being here. It's been a good time having this conversation with you, learning a lot from you. I'm sure our audience will benefit from this, and the community at large will take a lot, from what you're providing here tonight. Now, border security. You continue to. I peep that you continue. You're probably not a fan of Trump. I can kind of tell from how you've been deliberating tonight. So, with his act of border security, do you want to talk through any kind of response to how Trump is handling border security? There are a lot of I would what I would describe as
Mhm.
inhumane methods that are being carried on at the border. Do you think there are any ways we could improve border security in this country?
Mhm. So when I think about border security, I feel like it's a little bit of like a straw man. It's like this thing that we say is the most important thing, but it's missing the larger point. That Trump envisions border security as like how do we keep immigrants out? They say that it's about fentanyl, but actually that's not generally something that immigrants are bringing in. And immigrants commit crimes at much lower rates than people who
Mhm.
are born in the United States. So when I think about the border, I think like, how do we have like an orderly border? And I think a key to that would be like overhauling our immigration process. Like I mentioned a couple ideas, but one
Mhm.
thing we really need to look at is that we don't have work visas for unskilled roles that we have job openings for. And so we have an economic incentive for people to come here
Mhm.
over the border without documents because there is no, there are very limited work visas for agricultural workers, for seasonal workers. But if we could create like a PCA visa for people to
Mhm.
come and provide care in long-term care facilities in rural North Dakota, like
Mhm.
those jobs are there, the need is dire. That would be one way. Like if I'm coming from Venezuela with my children and somebody says you can come here and you're going to move to like the middle of nowhere in Wisconsin and care for like seniors, I'd be like, perfect. Like sign me up. Like I can't wait to live in Wisconsin and
Mhm.
have my children be here and be safe.
Mhm.
And so I think like one of my favorite immigration laws is a law that was called the Conrad Waiver Program, where we took really talented foreign physicians and we basically forced them to work in medically underserved areas or VA hospitals for a period of 3 or 5 years as part of their like immigration journey.
Mhm.
And we could do that with unskilled worker visas where we have these huge workforce needs. And that, like, it sounds like I'm ignoring your question, but it's all related to like just having like an orderly border where
Mhm.
people who are coming here because like they are afraid for their safety and their families, but also because we have an economic need for their labor. Um, and so I think creating, Biden did create these parolee programs for like Venezuelans, Nicaraguans. I feel so bad I'm forgetting the other country, one other country. And those programs were in part designed to like decrease the burden on the border of
Okay.
people showing
Okay.
up, on that day to be processed. And so I think there's a lot of creative things we can do to just create a more orderly process that meets our national needs.
Okay. Mel, your last question. Last question from you.
Again, Representative, thank you for all the work you've provided here tonight. Important information and also information needed within the immigrant community. My question here kind of relates to the misconception. I think I can close on that with just asking that what are the most common misconceptions about the rights of immigrants that you know of you want to share light on today?
Oh, you in the middle of your question, you asked a different question than I thought you were going to ask. I thought you were going to ask the most common misconceptions about immigration. So the most common misconceptions about immigration rights, I think just people don't have to answer questions by law enforcement about what is their immigration status, where were they born. They can ask for a lawyer. They have a right to remain silent. And so I think that's really important. I think the other thing is people truly have a right to not answer the door and let ICE in if they do not have a judicial warrant signed by a judge with their name and their address on it. And so people need to know that even though they're going to feel a lot of pressure to open the door and like listen to law enforcement and people in authority, that they don't have to, that they have that right. So I think those are two things. And just knowing that like institutions, schools in particular, really want them to come, like they want the children to come to school. They want the families to feel safe. They want to be a place that is a resource that is safe.
Okay. I know you said, like he changed his question in the
Yeah.
middle of it. So what
Mhm,
is the, let me just expand on that. Then what is the common misconception about immigrants?
mhm,
As I said, we
mhm,
live in a fighting environment. There's so much negativity, right? There's so much like information out there. So what is the common misconception about immigrants in these days and
mhm.
times?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that frustrates me is that people think that if you come to the United States for humanitarian reasons, as a refugee, as asylum seeker, that you are going to drain the system and not give. And that is just not true. For one example, is that a lot of people who come from other countries for humanitarian reasons are professionals. They're dentists and pharmacists and electricians. So they have those professional skills. But we also have really interesting data around how immigrants are much more likely to work like unusual schedules. And so a
Mhm.
lot of the jobs that require people to work unusual hours are
Mhm.
often filled by immigrants. There's a really great study by the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce that looks specifically at the question of undocumented immigrants in Minnesota, and they concluded that the labor they contributed, the taxes that they paid, exceeded the resources that they took, because immigrants are not eligible for a lot of different public benefits.
Okay.
So I think like people think like, oh well, there's like the high skilled immigration and that's like good for the economy and helpful, but then if you're coming as a refugee or a family-based immigrant, that somehow that you're not contributing in the same way. But actually, like all immigrants contribute like hugely to our economy.
Okay. Andrea, your last question.
Thank you so much for your time. This has been such a great conversation, and we appreciate you holding space to just answer all these questions. One question that I just wanted to touch upon was around travel, right? I know there's a lot.
Mhm,
I've been hearing a lot of things around like passports, get your passports updated. Um, as it relates to immigrants, do you have any words of wisdom around your passport, or if you want to travel? I know a lot of folks are scared, but things happen. What if they need to go bury a loved one or travel
mhm,
because someone's sick? Do you have any
mhm,
recommendations on how you can be mindful traveling and be safe or safeguard
mhm.
yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say like I was born in Wisconsin and I don't really feel very comfortable traveling internationally right now, so I can't imagine. I generally speaking, if you are a United States citizen and you have a valid passport, you should be able to travel internationally and re-enter without any issue. The one thing that's come up for me is a former client who had his green card reached out because he had some previous criminal convictions. And generally speaking, once you get your green card, like the rules are, like I mentioned, it's much harder to remove than like deny people entry. But the one kind of little carve out there is if you have some criminal issues in your past, then every time you travel, those can come into play. And so I would say if you have any criminal convictions, I mean, this is more green card holders, honestly. Like US citizens are US citizens. Like you should be able to enter if you have a passport. But green card holders, I think, I would say you also should be totally fine. But if you do have any criminal convictions that you had before you got your green card, or even after, actually, talking to an immigration attorney, like my former client had a little memo that I had written him a long time ago that he just took all the documents and he had my memo and he entered no issues. And that was like this weekend. So I can tell you that as of this weekend, it was fine.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, truly, like if you have a passport, you should be fine.
Okay. For immigrants that are here, right, the whole issue about chain migration, right? You are here,
Mhm,
you are U.S. citizen, and you have maybe your kids back home, or you have someone that you want to. What is going to happen to chain migration with all of these?
mhm.
I mean, with everything going on, what is going to happen? What becomes of chain migration? Is that something?
Mhm.
I mean,
Well,
those are other legal pathways. What becomes of chain migration
So,
as an immigration attorney?
so, so, like family-based immigration has
Mhm,
always been painfully slow. Like
mhm,
literally, if you want to sponsor a sibling, it can be decades. If you want to sponsor an adult unmarried son or daughter, it could be like 7 years. So, like the idea that it's like this like domino effect and all these people come, it's like that's not how it works. It's like a generation and then the next people come.
mhm,
The one thing I'm worried about, I'm actually doing a presentation on this on Monday, and I'm like, what are the things that like have happened and have not yet happened? There
mhm,
is a database that the Department of State manages where they tell us basically who's at the front of the line. So if you're the adult unmarried daughter of a US citizen born in Japan, like who's at the front of that line? And so per country, per category, per month, they update
mhm,
it.
mhm,
And it's always been a very mysterious chart that I always really question. And I've been watching it now since 2001 every month, and it never makes sense. But I do worry it's kind of a black box. And so I feel like it is potentially subject to manipulation.
mhm,
But honestly, I feel like it's been manipulated the entire time I've worked in immigration law, which is now 24 years.
mhm,
But as far as like those categories, I could see like in theory, they always talk about getting rid of the diversity visa lottery, which is not
mhm,
what you're talking about. But the other thing that sometimes comes up is getting rid of the category for siblings of US citizens, which honestly takes so long, it's not very practical. It's sort
mhm.
of one of those things where you file the petition and then you're like, maybe in 15 years, my brother might come with his family. So yeah, so I could see maybe they get rid of that category. Um, there has not been any discussion of that type of immigration reform that I have heard of in
Okay.
recent years or months.
Okay. Well, as we close out tonight, what message do you want to leave our audience out there? Folks that are worried, folks that are so scared, that are confused, all this misinformation. What's your party message? What message you want to leave our audience tonight?
I just want people to know that they are seen and that I can tell them if they're here in Minnesota, especially that there are many, many leaders in our state legislature, in the governor's office, the AG, across our schools, all of our agencies that really care and are being incredibly proactive and detailed and trying to figure out what can we do? How can we slow down enforcement? How can we protect people's safety and their data? And how do we acknowledge like people's humanity in a
Mm,
time when the federal government is not doing so? And
mm,
so I just want people to know that they're seen, even if they're in other states, they're seen, and to reach out to your electeds if they can be helpful, if there's something they need to know, and just share your stories and connect with one another and connect with your leaders.
mhm. Well, thank you so much, Representative Sandra. I mean, it's been good having you on, providing us some great information, some great education. we hope you can become a partner of Inner Circle Podcast because our listeners kind of look forward to such a conversation, to such an education. So we appreciate you taking up your busy schedule to join us here tonight. So you have a very good night and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. It was a really good conversation. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Yeah,
Hope to
thank you.
see
Good
you
night.
soon.
Good night.
Conversation, let's set the tone. In a circle podcast where love is well known.
Well, folks, that concludes the end of our show. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll see you guys tomorrow with another great topic. So thank you so much. And it was a very good discussion, but we'll debrief. So thank you so much, everyone. Good
In a
night.
circle podcast where hearts unite.